Story 1. My first girlfriend was absolutely baffled and amused that men can just make their genitals twitch on command. She had always assumed, well, it's either soft or hard, but other than that, it's not like guys have any actual control over it. Story 2. Testicles are stretchy. My wife is obsessed with mine moving around. Occasionally, I'll pull on the skin a bit because of an uncomfortable configuration, and she'll wince a bit. Story 3. I had a girl get mad because I became aroused while I was sleeping. I had to urinate really badly, and that's just something that occurs. She assumed I was dreaming about being intimate with other women. Eventually, I convinced her that it just happens sometimes, particularly after urinating. She cried profusely and apologized. I wish I had ended the relationship there, as things became significantly worse. Story 4. Back in college, my girlfriend said, "I don't understand how you can find me so sexy first thing in the morning." I asked, "What do you mean?" "Well, whenever you wake up next to me, you're so, down there." Apparently, she had no idea what morning wood was, or that it had nothing to do with her. Story 5. Met this lady a while back, and things got heated. It wasn't her first time, obviously, but I could tell she was still quite naive. However, I never realized just how naive she was until she moved to give me a hand job. She grabbed my unit with such force, I thought it was a hydraulic arm. I should have quietly told her to ease off, but I didn't. When she started jerking, it seemed as if she was trying to start a chainsaw. She was almost lifting me off the bed by my unit. That did it for me. I went limp shortly after. Her look of disappointment was more because she thought I didn't find her attractive enough to maintain an erection. It didn't help that even after I told her to be a tad more gentle, she just couldn't seem to pull it off. I kind of like having a penis for future use, so I opted out. Story 6. Not a woman but another guy in the army thought the sphincter was a flap of skin that made the reverberating fart sound by flapping when you passed gas. We called him Ass Flap after that. Story 7. My wife had never understood that punching a man in the sensitive area hurts intensely until she punched me while we were playfully messing around in the kitchen. At first, when I went to the floor, she was laughing and saying, "Get up!" But 15 minutes later, when I had yet to uncoil myself from the fetal position on the kitchen floor, she came up to me and timidly asked, Did that really hurt?" Another 5 minutes, when I could breathe normally again, I had to explain the mechanics of why receiving a blow to that area is extremely painful. She now understands. Story 8. An erection is not always intentional or time-place appropriate. At a certain period in my life, I was so touch-starved that just getting a long and warm hug was enough for the body to start reacting. However, my body could not differentiate between that and someone holding on to me for comfort while crying. I was seriously going, no, 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 and no, when a friend was working through some stuff. Story 9. I recently told my brother and his girlfriend about an alarming situation involving a coworker of mine. The context was her becoming pregnant after assaulting a man. Brother's girlfriend said, "Well, obviously he liked it if he was aroused." My brother and I were stunned. All I could manage to direct her towards a better understanding was, "That's not quite how that works. It's a physiological response. Imagine if someone claimed a woman enjoyed an assault because of her physical reaction. That would be incredibly wrong." Story 10. I overheat very easily. Whenever we go for a hike and the temperature is below 65 degrees Fahrenheit, I receive a small lecture about how it's too cold and you'll freeze out there because I only wear shorts and a light hoodie. "Sweetheart, I will be cold for the first 10 minutes of the hike. After that, I'll be sweating." Story 11. I've had intimate encounters with multiple women who not once ever touched me in a sexual manner. They made absolutely no attempt to arouse or stimulate me in any way. They would just take their top off and lay there, expecting an intimate act. This might work at 18, but not at 40. Story 12. Not realizing that erections can be purely reflexive to physical stimulus. It's why some women think men cannot be raped. Because a man getting an erection means he wants it, even if he's telling the person to stop. Story 13. It was this unexpectedly sweet and intimate moment with an ex-girlfriend who had her hand on my private parts after intimacy. She inquired about how I can move them like that, and it led to this discussion about how they move on their own because they need to maintain specific temperatures to produce sperm and maintain their health. She seemed excited about learning that while feeling them move. It was really sweet. Story 14. I've had an uncomfortable experience once where my privates were roughly handled. That happened 12 years ago, and it still makes me nervous whenever they receive even the slightest bit of attention. Treat them gently. Do not mistreat them. Story 15. Sometime in my late teens, I read a medical journal publication about a study on men being able to detect the high fertility period in women by bodily odor. But the majority of the time, the men didn't consciously know that's why their attraction level increased towards some women. The study also suggested that during ovulation, a woman can actually appear more physically attractive to a man despite that attraction potentially not being there when her ovulation ends. So apparently, men have a superpower, physiological beer goggles. And it makes you all occasionally have one-night stands with ladies that wouldn't usually tickle your pickle. I do not suggest using this as your get off my arm. Woman, I'm trying to sneak out before you wake up explanation. I told my husband about that study earlier in our dating status days, and true to form, he responds with, "Let me sniff you." So of course, I push him off and say he's just a squirrel in my yard trying to get a nut. We still laugh about this because he does get a lot more touchy-feely during my ovulation when I'm not even aware that time is upon me. Story 16. I'm a man who went into massage therapy. In the class, around 12 people were present, and I was the only man in the class. There was one class where a student asked, "What do you do in case of an erection?" The teacher seriously said, "It's up to you, but in my opinion, a grown man should have control over his erections. You would be justified if you were uncomfortable," and ended the session right there. I was so shocked at that reply from somebody in what is a medically focused field. Being vastly outnumbered and risking being labeled as a bad actor, I admit I didn't speak up in defense of men. There really wasn't any winning that one. Story 17. Most are aware that we are sensitive in the balls area. Most are also not aware just how much. A light tap can send us over the edge into the not touching the area today zone. Even too vigorous hand job can sometimes end up hitting the family jewels in a bad way. Speaking of vigorous hand jobs that are just too much too much sometimes. We are not starting a sports car here. Please slow down with the burning leather. Story 18. I can't tell you how many times women have been confused about how I can comfortably ride horses, based on the mistaken belief that your testicles would be between you and the saddle. Pretty wild thing to think. Haha. Story 19. I believe there's a misconception that being uncircumcised equates to having phimosis. I recall an ex-partner telling me she had never been with someone who was uncircumcised and wouldn't know how to approach it. My response was one of surprise, stating, "What are you talking about? I am uncircumcised." She was taken aback by this. Our intimacy was frequent, and she was very giving numerous times throughout our relationship. It was puzzling, but I think this misunderstanding is more widespread than many realize. Story 20. Explaining to my most recent ex that there are varying degrees of erection. Stimulation without mental excitement can result in what I've been calling 1/3 potential. Yes, it gets hard, but it's still lacking. Then there's the I'm into it, but not in a wild state, or 2/3 potential. And then, in my approaching 30s age, there's the wow, I'm both incredibly into this and my physiology and brain chemistry are here with me, where it feels like I'm stretching out of my own skin. She was under the impression that it's either all or none. That is absolutely not the case. Blood pressure, diet, mental and physical health all play a part. Story 21. Dismissing the physical pain that men feel in many ways, I see too many women casually accepting violent or dangerous conditions for men because they think they are tough enough to handle it. No. To be fair, many women also have a healthy respect for danger and aversion to violence, but many also think it's okay when it comes to men. I blame the sensationalism in pop culture and warmongering. Story 22. I live in a nursing home because of advanced amyotrophic lateral sclerosis. I need help to urinate into a urinal bottle. Every single female staff member has pinched my willy with the bottle. Some of them can't understand, even after exhaustive explanation, why I yelp with pain and can't pee when it's pinched off. To explain why it hurts, the urethra, where the urine flows through, is only lined with mucus. Without this thin layer of protection, the salt from the urine will burn the walls like salt in an open wound inside the penis. Yes, it feels like fire and agony. It takes almost no force to pinch the urethra, and when you almost pinch it, it's much worse because the mucus lining is blasted out. Story 23. I know every guy on here will relate when I say this, but we can get unwarranted and unwanted erections, literally without anything sexual crossing our minds. This can be very embarrassing, especially in public. Women might often misunderstand, but I don't blame them because they don't fully understand a man's body, just as we don't fully understand theirs. But yeah, ladies, this really is difficult for us when it happens and someone sees it and automatically thinks it's directed at them. Story 24. I do not know if the majority of men feel this way or if it is primarily a male problem, but my Adam's apple is very sensitive. I do not even like having the zipper of a jacket on it, and definitely not a hand, arm, or head when cuddling. Edit. It feels uncomfortable, not painful. Story 25. I had a female coworker at the delivery company I worked for. She said a guy answered the door in his underwear, and the little guy was awake too. She said, "Oh, he probably didn't realize." I told her, "Oh yes, he did." Story 26. That erection equals horny. Can it be a sign of arousal? Absolutely. Is it always because the person is aroused? Absolutely not. Sometimes it's just because the wind changed direction. And this idea is ingrained in even a lot of men too, and it is so harmful, especially when it comes to being a male and being sexually abused. Well, you got hard so clearly you wanted it. You're hard so you must want it. You came so you must have enjoyed it. Story 27. I used to be able to do the splits in my teens. I was super flexible thanks to martial arts. Literally every time I would do it, someone would ask, "Doesn't that hurt your balls?" Like what? The muscles you stretch to do the splits are in your legs, and the boys hang in front, not under you. Sure, I guess they're kind of near the action, but they're not involved at all. What's scary is that I've had guys ask too. Story 28. Yes, some of us are extremely sensitive. For example, I accidentally brush a doorknob and it's excessively sensitive. Please keep that in mind before just grabbing it out of nowhere, and talk about it beforehand, obviously. Story 29. My first girlfriend had been educated about the size, shape, and function of a penis, but not the color. Nothing ruins having a woman take your pants off, especially for the first time, like laughter. Story 30. I was with someone who didn't understand that morning would often just means I need to urinate. She wanted to engage in intimacy with me right then. It took a lot of convincing to explain to her that we'd have a lot more fun if I could just go and urinate first. Story 31. I once had a girl who, while attempting to pleasure me, held me at the very base and moved her hand up and down with considerable force, accidentally hitting my sensitive areas with each motion. It was quite painful. I was aware she had some experience, but I gently guided her hand slightly higher and suggested she go slower. She seemed confused and a bit annoyed, responding sharply. My ex said that's the best way to do it and that guys love it. It was the only way he could climax when I did it. It turns out her previous partner had a specific preference for intense stimulation, which is somewhat uncommon, and he didn't want her to question it. So he convinced her that all men enjoyed it, leading to her frustration with me when I didn't. It's important to remember that preferences vary greatly, and it's never safe to assume everyone will enjoy the same things, especially when it comes to such sensitive matters. Story 32. Pretty much every girl in my high school thought that men could control erections. I mean, we even had sex education and everything, but they still thought men could just decide to get an erection and turn it on and off like a switch. Story 33. I was in my late 20s, I'm in the United States, before I saw an uncircumcised penis, and I thought there was something wrong with it. Thankfully, I didn't say anything to him, but a girlfriend explained it to me. Every guy I had dated, all the guys I had seen flashing their business in school, and even the boys I had babysat had all been circumcised, so I just didn't know there was an alternative. Story 34. Most women, in my experience, don't seem to think men have any erogenous zones other than the penis. There's absolutely zero exploration of my body with hands or mouth. I might get the occasional but grab and backstroke, but other than that, it just doesn't seem to occur to women. As a man, I go out of my way to touch and find out what feels good to her. So, I've developed a little repertoire of moves over my lifetime and learned that everyone is different. The focus just seems to be on the penis. Some don't even touch the testicles. Story 35. Nobody wants to urinate on the floor. It's not due to bad aim or lack of trying. One moment everything is fine, the next millisecond there are 7 jets all going in separate directions as if they each have a mind of their own. Seriously, intelligent people abandon engineering degrees because of how complex fluid dynamics can be? And you're asking, what's so hard about aiming in the right direction? The situation is simply unpredictable.